You must have known that this day was coming, where we have the top 3 gimbals in the world, the Weebill S, the Crane 2S, and the Crane 3S. All these gimbals have their purposes, they have their pros, their cons, and in today's video, I'm going to show you which gimbal is the best fit for you. Let's start off with the smallest one, the Weebill S. All right, let's get real for a second. It's not about the size. It's how you use it. And that's what makes the Weebill S probably one of my favorite choices. And especially if you're a traveling filmmaker, a run and gunner, I think this is such a great little nifty tool to have in your camera bag constantly, because broken down, it's just an extremely small gimbal. I mean, look at this. Very small footprint, about the same, maybe a little bit bigger than the footprint of a mirrorless camera. And you also have the option to add these little quick release plates on your tripod. And these little quick release plates allow you to go from an upright gimbal position to an underslung gimbal position. And this allows you to go from traditional angle shots to low angle shots. And on top of that, the lightweight of this gimbal allows you to hold your camera rig for longer periods of time. This gimbal also has a lower rear angled motor, which a lot of people love, especially with these new gimbal designs. And this allows you to completely see your LCD screen without any blockage. We also have full camera control along with follow focus or zoom control. We're using 2 18650 batteries that you can actually buy on Amazon, and you can constantly charge as many batteries as you want and just keep popping them in as soon as the other ones die out. So it's great that we don't have any proprietary batteries in the system. You can literally pick these up on Amazon. Now, build quality is a really big thing for me, and I'm sure it is for you. With the Weebill S, we do get more plastic parts than some of the higher end gimbals. So sometimes when you grab it, it can feel like it's, it doesn't feel as sturdy as the heavier and larger gimbals. But again, this is just to keep this gimbal lightweight. So if you want something that feels a little bit more sturdy, and if you want something that can hold heavier payloads, then we'll talk about the other gimbals, and I'm sure one of the other two will interest you as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, don't let the size fool you, because this thing can load up really heavy rigs. For example, the biggest rig that I put on this was my Sony A9 with a small rig camera cage, along with a 70 to 200 G Master lens. And that's a massive setup for this tiny gimbal. Yes, it didn't balance properly because the frame of this gimbal is just too small, but the motors were strong enough to compensate for it, allowing you to get very quick shots with such a large setup. But yes, that is definitely an overkill setup for such a small gimbal. I would recommend something like a 24 to 70 f4. You can even get away with a G Master with a Sony mirrorless camera, and I would top it off at that amount of weight. When it comes down to the overall smoothness and stability of this gimbal, it does a pretty decent job when it's set to its default settings. But that's why I created my own custom settings for this gimbal, and you can check out that video right here. And when those settings are dialed into this gimbal, it acts like a dream. It's smooth, it's stable, it gets you those buttery pans and buttery tilts. I just absolutely love using it. And on top of that, like I mentioned, since it's such a lightweight and small gimbal, you can definitely add it to your fake RE Trinity rig. Next up, we got this big boy. This is the Crane 3S. This is the largest gimbal that zhiyun currently produces, and it's also their most powerful gimbal. You can rig up anything from a small Sony mirrorless camera all the way up into an Alexa Mini. And you also have the option to add more torque to this gimbal, and I made a full comprehensive review / tutorial on how to use zhiyun's external battery pack, which adds a lot more torque to these motors, allowing you to have as much control as you want. Now, the overall aesthetics and the design of this gimbal is very similar to that of the Weebill S. We do have a plastic frame on the lower end of the gimbal. Everything on the top is anodized aluminum, so it does feel extremely sturdy. One thing I do want you to note is the large motors that they put on this gimbal. It's literally the size of my knuckles. It's absolutely massive. We also have an upgraded locking system, so your gimbal won't be flopping around. We also have a removable accessory handle, and this allows you to attach other accessories And the Easy Sling handle allows you to adjust motor parameters, camera parameters, and so on. So it's a good little accessory to have. We also have 2 mini rosette mounts allowing you to attach that battery pack that I mentioned earlier and any other accessories such as lights, microphones, and monitors. This gimbal gets heavy quick, so keep that in mind. Getting as much support for this gimbal is an absolute key. For example, Small Rig started making a gimbal ring. It's carbon fiber and it's a great little accessory to have with your massive gimbal. When it comes down to the battery power and battery life, well, we're using the same batteries as the Weebill S, except we're using 3 18650 batteries. So this is going to get you about 10 hours of runtime. Fully rigged out, you're going to probably get a little bit less. It also depends on your payload and how well you balance this gimbal. That's another reason why I suggest getting this battery pack, because you're going to get more power and more battery life at the same time. The overall stability of this gimbal, again, is very good. The only issue I had with this gimbal is that it does have some vibration issues when you're using super lightweight setups, which is why it's important to dial in your custom settings. So if you haven't already, make sure you check out that custom settings video, because I show you how to dial it in perfectly so you don't have any of these vibration issues. Now, when it comes down to the overall frame and appearance of the gimbal, again, similar to the Weebill S, some people are still not used to holding their gimbal like this, which is why zhiyun made the Crane 2S gimbal, and we're gonna get into that really soon, so stay tuned. This is for professional rigs. If you're just gonna be flying a Sony mirrorless camera, not the gimbal for you. I promise you this is definitely overkill for those of you who are using Sony mirrorless cameras. I don't use this gimbal too much, I'll be honest with you. It's because I don't have such massive rigs that I can put on this thing. It's so much power for me to have. And on top of that, it's a big gimbal. It's hard to travel with, so you have to keep that in mind. I also want to show you that I added the extension plate up here. I made a video on this too. This extension plate allows you to mount much larger setups, so that's also why this gimbal looks larger than when it comes from the factory. So this is definitely a niche gimbal for those of you who are using those more professional rigs, something that you need to fight wind with. This is definitely the gimbal for you. But for the average person like me, the average filmmaker, the run and gun person, you might not need such a powerful gimbal. Now, this is the gimbal that I've been using ever since it came out. Almost every day, on everything that I shoot, I would pull out this gimbal. Why? Because it has that traditional upright gimbal design. That's something I'm used to. That's something I fell in love with when it came down to using a gimbal. I just love the standard design of it just being like a pole. You put a camera on it and you're done. Okay, so that on its own is just something I really love about the Crane 2S. It feels right. You know, it's just, you pick it up and you're like, okay, I'm used to this. I don't have anything awkward to hold on to. So the Crane 2S is definitely using that traditional gimbal design, just like what we saw on the original Crane 2. We have obviously upgraded motors, extremely powerful. I tested out for you in this video right here, so check it out. We also have the option to lower the roll motor, so that way the LCD display does not get blocked on your screen. Now, the only thing is that when you get the Crane 2S directly from the factory and you open it up, you'll notice that the roll motor is not going to be lowered to its 45-degree angle. And this is an option that zhiyun decided to give to the user. Do you want it to be at a 90-degree angle or a 45-degree angle? A lot of people surprisingly prefer the 90-degree angle motor better, because some say you get more torque out of the motors. I honestly haven't seen much of a performance increase from just leaving it the way it was from the factory, but I could go either way with the roll motor. Obviously, I'm more used to using it as a 90-degree roll motor, but I made a full tutorial on how to drop this thing in case you're interested and in case you get this gimbal too. We also have 2 accessory mounts on this gimbal, allowing you to attach lights and monitors and microphones, anything you want really. But these accessory mounts are exactly where they need to be, directly in line with your camera. On the other gimbals, the accessory ports, in my opinion, were farther away from the camera than I would have actually liked. The Crane 2S's accessory ports are exactly where they need to be, close to the camera. That way you don't have to worry about cables as much, and it just looks better on the gimbal too. Along with that, the center of gravity, it just works. It makes the weight feel normal, and it doesn't put any extra pressure on your back or on your shoulder when you hold this thing. And just like on the Crane 3S, you can use the small rig gimbal ring too, which is actually my go-to setup. I use this gimbal and the small rig gimbal ring. Now, another big improvement to this gimbal, which I think is a nice little touch that the other gimbals don't have, is the carbon fiber handle. It made it a little bit lighter, and it just feels better to grip onto this thing rather than just having an aluminum pole. So I really like that premium luxury touch of carbon fiber instead of just having that aluminum pole. And on top of that, it makes it feel like a much higher end product. When it comes down to payload and the cameras that you can fly with this gimbal, we are not going to be flying Alexa Minis on this thing. You can fly your Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, your Sony mirrorless, your Canon DSLRs easily, even up to a 70 to 200 G Master, no problem. This thing will handle it. So when it comes down to power, don't worry about it. But if you're using setups like Alexa Minis and Reds, actually some Reds will be able to fit on this. It depends on how you rig it up. But that's already pushing the limits because the frame is just so much smaller than that of the Crane 3S. So again, this comes down to what you shoot with. What cameras do you shoot with? What kind of videos do you shoot? It really does depend on that. And that leads me to my next point. We have another great feature on this gimbal, and that is the vertical mounting system. So for those of you who have a lot of clients that need Instagram videos done or just overall vertical videos done, then this gimbal is a definite solution for you, and it's the only gimbal out of these three that has that option. The axis locks on this gimbal, in my opinion, are the best out of all three of these gimbals. It's a simple one latch system, and it's extremely sturdy, so you won't be able to budge the motors or the axes while you're traveling. When it comes down to overall smoothness and stability, I do think that this gimbal performed the best. Simply because I loaded up my Sony mirrorless camera, I put up my 24 to 70, my 16 to 35 lens, and it felt perfect. The smoothness, the dampening, the speed, it just felt right. Also because the center of gravity, because of the gimbal is just upright like this, it really felt like the gimbal that I wanted for a long time. So really consider this before you buy your gimbal. What type of work are you going to be doing? What type of camera rig are you going to be using? Those two things are what you are needing to look for when it comes down to getting a gimbal. And that's why I'm sticking with my Crane 2S. Also, don't forget, I made detailed reviews on each of these gimbals, so if you want more information on, let's say, the Crane 2S, Weebill S, or the Crane 3S, definitely check out those videos. I'll link them either in the cards or in the description box below, and I'll also leave the links to these gimbals down below too, so make sure you check those out. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.